Hello and welcome back to Earthbeat Visions, a history of the future sound of London. This week we are still in 2007 and we're going to have a look at an album that's called Environments. Release date 19th November 2007 for the download, 21st July 2008 for the CD, 18th September 2015 for the LP. What to say about this one? Environments was advertised as a forthcoming amorphous androgynous album in the inner sleeve of Lifeforms in May 1994. Compilations featuring then exclusive amorphous androgynous tracks in 94 also mentioned it. Signed, sealed, delivered too, with the note "New album Environments to be released in autumn 94, while an early appearance of a study of 6 guitars on A Brief History of Ambient Volume 3, The Music of Changes, was credited as taken from the forthcoming amorphous androgynous album Environments, and even listed as being released on the Virgin offshoot Quigley, which released Tales of Ephedrina, as well as featuring a directed by FSOL credit, much like that album. It even received a catalogue number from Astralworks. A Melody Maker article from June 94 declared they have 2 more albums waiting for release. All of this points very much in the direction that Environments was a fully scheduled release due for proper distribution rather than simply a potential album that was never realised, as has been the case for certain rumoured releases in the band's catalogue. For one reason or another though, autumn 94 rolled around with no release, and by the end of the year ISDN had come out. The change of style with that album undoubtedly had some impact on the decision to focus on newer material, especially given that some of Environments was the best part of 2 years old by the time its original planned release date came around, and Brian and Gaz had started working with rawer, more beat-focused material. The much-delayed Lifeforms Path single almost certainly contributed to the chaos that was the late 94 release schedule. Many fans long believed the album had morphed into ISDN, what with the plain black square representing the cover and Lifeforms matching the initial black edition of ISDN, and the final release of a study of 6 guitars on the latter. Nevertheless, other than the knowledge that it would be a somewhat ambient release based around the titular sound collages that frequently link tracks on the band's albums and mixes, almost everything else about the record remained unknown. A troll pretending to be the board admin announced a remastered version with bonus tracks was due for release in the early days of the official forum, but otherwise things remained quiet. When the From the Archive series was begun in 2007, there was talk of it being a 6-album set, with one of those being Environments. It was announced in May that the bulk of the album had been found, and Brian was working on piecing it together back in the way it was in 94. The album was completed by August, but no further information seemed forthcoming, until a surprise update of FSOL Digital on the 19th of November. The site received another design update, a proper release of From the Archives Volume 4, an album called By Any Other Name, and, in the words of manager Graham, a little thing called Environments. The initial cover absolutely defines placeholder. The task of defining a new distinctive sleeve was given to Buggy, and in the meantime fans were given a white square with the title in black. Not very inspiring, and actually quite disheartening at the time, especially given the totally inappropriate font, but other than it appearing as the default cover on all music, it's been forgotten about. Reactions to the music were typically mixed. There's a certain amount of crossover with familiar material, with elements of Ill Flower, Cascade Part 1, Tired and An End of Sorts being the most obvious sections, although reused samples from various 93 to 94 tracks are present throughout, and the 2-part structure means finding certain sections is difficult. It's worth remembering that this was originally considered to be a side project album, however. Amorphous was the band's playground to test out new, less commercially friendly ideas without endangering the FSOL name, which had become a kind of brand at that point. Transmission set lists were given to stations who requested them for publishing purposes, and in every case the between-track sections were described as amorphous androgynous environment tracks. Indeed, had the Amorphous name not been claimed by the psychedelic rock project in the 21st century, Environments could very easily have come out as an Amorphous album itself rather than an FSOL one. So while the 13-year wait, plus the new FSOL assignation, added a lot of expectation around the record that almost certainly couldn't be met, judged on its own merits as an intriguing side project record from mid-94, it succeeds admirably. There has been some discussion about just how close to the original version of the album this final release is, and Brian has informed me that it's very close. There are clearly a few moments that seem to come from the Dead Cities era, most notably Glass's Girl in Hyde Park and the environment surrounding it, which appeared regularly on the 96-97 tour, but for the most part it plays out like an album version of the 3D Headspace tour, on which many of the album's sections were debuted. The 2-part structure is apparently a homage to Cosmic and Berlin School albums of the early 70s, something which matches up with each part featuring a lengthy sequencer workout in the middle. Effectively, if one took an early 94 ISDN transmission, replaced Lifeform's tracks with unheard pieces, and released the results as an album, it would sound like this. And as 94 is one of the group's golden periods, that's no bad thing for me. The final atmosphere is darker, moodier, even spacier, those sequencer sections in particular, than Lifeform's, bringing to mind the exploration of alien landscapes that people sometimes offer as a description of the band's music. It would take 8 months for the album to come out as a physical release, being released alongside the Peppermint Tree in July 2008. Despite the classic side-long track format, it didn't receive the vinyl treatment until 2015, at which point the format was booming and FSOL Digital was able to afford regular vinyl releases. With From the Archive series utilising archived imagery to match the music, Environments features the first new buggy cover design in 12 years, and a marvellous one it is too. A landscape shot of a salt lake with surreal colouring, green salt, pink sky, with a grid pattern over the top. It's utterly FSOL and yet completely new, lacking the somewhat crude colouring techniques of 90s software. It's quite an alien looking landscape, perfectly fitting the mood, the Lifeforms-esque desert shot on the rear being similarly fitting. The booklet, however, is somewhat at odds with these images, and indeed the music, showcasing a number of cityscape shots, an open concrete space surrounded by tall buildings, a long tunnel, a time-lapse photograph of a motorway, and a tower block, all overlaid by various semi-opaque polygons and a bit of text. The writing is classic 90s FSOL speak, sci-fi-esque phrases without any obvious meaning, fast sound enclosure project, soft focus, ultra-wide, normal interruption pattern, accelerated accent, broken data transmission, damaged light, silent carpeted corridors with slowly closing doors, fast reverberation, extreme white noise, blurred opaque objects. The music might be old, but the packaging has everything one could hope for from a new FSOL album. Except of course the familiar faces, no Spiky, no Vit, no Shawneen. The band name is presented in mixed case for the first time ever on an album cover, a new era. The vinyl features a rear cover image that had previously been seen in the CD booklet of Environments 2. The CD art features the same layout as the From the Archives disc, complete with the EBV and FSOL Digital exploding head logos, but in place of the spiky wireframe on the disc is a new logo, 2 squares, each split into 9 joined by 3 lines. This logo also appears on the back cover of the CD under the tracklist in the centre of the image. Other than this placement of the tracklist, the back cover and spines feature the same layout as the From the Archive CDs, giving a sense of uniformity to the early FSOL Digital era at this point. The rear and spines of the CD, as well as the rear of the LP, call the album Environments 1, foreshadowing the later volumes in the series. This was not referenced on the original digital edition, however. The 2 physical versions differ in other subtle ways. The vinyl cover is greyer and features slightly different fonts. The LP lacks the Electronic Brain Violence text and no exploding head logos on the rear cover, but features the Herd Killing logo on the labels. The CD edition is the first to credit Future Song Publishing. Having worked briefly with Westbury Music, Brian's publisher from the Humanoid era, the band went further into independence by setting up their own micro-publishing arm in cooperation with Freedom, their management company. Sadly, there's no inner sleeve artwork on the vinyl edition. Both editions incorrectly list Part 2 as being a minute longer than it actually is. Alongside the vinyl release, 10 copies were released bundled with a signed test pressing of the album. Environments Part 1. A dark drone. Some bleeps. A voice talking about the future of computers. A woman asking, do we realise now that computers make people irrelevant? A collage of sounds. Children talking about mum shouting them. Stay spaced. Some whooshes. Synth notes. It's impossible to describe the music of Environments accurately without resorting to a list of sounds. The term Environments was created by the band to describe the short atmospheric sound collages they used to link tracks on albums and mixes, even going so far as to piece many together to form long atmospheric sections on their broadcasts. The late 93 Kiss FM transmissions and early 94 3D Headspace tour are the most environment heavy of all the group's broadcasts, and it's no surprise that the large number of these led to the possibility of creating an album out of them. And so those familiar with the band's transmissions may recognise a lot of what's going on here. At 1:47 there are even some Papua New Guinea samples as heard on many of the 3D Headspace tour shows, followed by a familiar evocative piano motif, and then the buzzing synth from Lifeform's Path 5 and Kai. Afterwards, the piece moves into new territory with metallic drones and tinkling wind chimes. It's heavy-going, dark stuff, not the gentle field recordings and synth gurgles of Lifeforms, but something a lot more sinister. For a piece from an album that would have been released between Lifeforms and ISDN, it's kind of a halfway house mood-wise. Around 5 minutes there's a synth or organ sample most familiar from Ill Flower, although used to play an entirely different melody here, followed by birdsong, chanting voices and haunting flute melodies. Once again it's a bleak atmosphere created with a voice sample repeatedly asking, "So what are you going to do?" One of the pair's seemingly favourite sounds, utterly creepy laughter, comes in and smashes into a synth sequence. At 9 minutes in, this is the first real sense of rhythm on the entire album. The sequence comes from Cascade Part 1, but is given a very different treatment here. Other sequences come in to join it, followed by broad, sweeping synth chords. It's a clear homage to the 70s space music of Tangerine Dream and Klaus Schulze, and is a style not previously heard in the band's catalogue. Unsurprisingly, they pulled it off incredibly. It's unusual to hear such a long burst of music from Eversowhere without any samples in it at all, although the rest of the album makes up for that, of course. Bells and haunting vocals were up next, bringing the more uplifting mood back down into more eerie territory once more. Some bolder sounding samples come in, opening up the vista to an epic scale without losing the darkness, and after some flutes and field recordings, it's into an alternate version of Wookiee from the Archives 4. Lacking the vocals and louder drums, and with the synth sequence occupying more of the track, it's a very fitting piece here. At 20 minutes 40, there's a brief environmental section that was previously unheard until the 96 tour, followed by distorted percussion that gradually builds itself up from abstract noise into a fully rhythmic track with stop-start beats, all sorts of gurgling samples, bubbly melodic sequences and fast synth chords. It's a really fun piece with some excellent sound design in the arrangement, and it's cut off bluntly by a man stating clockwise rotation, leading into another run of samples. This final section breaks down to a quiet acoustic guitar sample, tiger roars, the "how did that happen, he knew more about what I was going to do than I did" sample from Apocalypse Now, and waves of atmospheric sound in an environment used on a large number of 93 and 94 transmissions. The Wookiee section appears on the Mushroom 11 soundtrack as Formaldehyde, and the Ill Flower section as Remorseful. The full list of tracks that share samples with Environments Part 1 runs to Papua New Guinea, Environments Part 2, Absent with Concept, Swarm, Lifeforms Path 5 and 6, Kai, Ill Flower, Lifeforms, Ice Pop Skin Explodes Everybody Dead, Factories and Assembly, The Silent Place, Somewhere Near, Cascade Part 1 and 2, Plausibility, Wookiee, Amoeba, and Rising Headspace Mix. It's almost like a mini best of. Environments Part 2. The second side of Environments opens with the Horse environment, familiar to 1994 transmission listeners and previously included as part of Tired and Live in New York, as well as feedback from the opening environment to Dirty Shadows. This adds to the album feeling like a link between Lifeforms and ISDN. This is followed by Lifeforms Path 6's opening environment, some of the distorted drums from the end of the previous track, and a long run of sounds familiar from the 3D Headspace tour, including mangled voices and synth squelches. The gated synths and steam train environment that follows originally bore the title New Electric Dimension during broadcasts, although here it lacks the spoken sample that gave it that name. It's an enjoyably bright, spacious section after the dark opening. More darkness swiftly follows, however, with familiar wordless vocal samples, flutes, bells, mangled field recordings and synth sweeps. After more sound collage, this part's synth sequencer section comes in, and once again it's Cascade related, built around the synth string chord sequence from Part 5, also heard in An End of Sorts. Here it's given a total makeover, becoming another Tangerine Dream-esque space music epic, complete with beautiful improvised melodies. It's considerably longer than the section on the first side, and much better for it. It's followed by a mixture of environments, blending 1996 tour sounds, including the Hyde Park Crying Girl from Glass, with outro sounds from Little Brother. Much in the same way as the first side, a brief collage section follows, the usual suspects all present, including phone dials, field recordings, spoken word, before breaking into a more rhythmic section to close. Bright synth chords, breakbeats, melodic tune percussion loops, and layers of Lifeform style organic sampling all come together to bring the album to an end on a bouncy, upbeat note. Fittingly, the final sound on Part 2 is a reprise of the opening drone of Part 1, bringing the environments full circle. The full list of tracks that share samples in Environments Part 2: Tired, Mango Tree, Dirty Shadows, Mains Interrupt, Swarm, Are They Fighting Us, Lifeforms Path 6, Environments Part 1, Vit, Ill Flower, Among Myself, Cascade Part 5, An End of Sorts, Glass, Meadows, Little Brother, 100 Baby Spiders, Absent with Concept, Speedball, Small Town, and Papua New Guinea. By any other name. Release date: 19th November 2007, digital, 22nd of September 2008, CD, 12th of February 2024, vinyl. Somewhat overshadowed by being released at the same time as Environments and From the Archives Volume 4, By Any Other Name completed the second trilogy of archive material in November 2007 and fulfilled the original prediction of there being 6 archive albums. However, unlike other archive releases, it is focused entirely on one era, the pre-Virgin dance music period when FSOL hid behind various guises. Poetically described by Gaz as having resulted from the discovery of a box of dats in the darkest corner of the attic, it's an intriguing collection of largely un-FSOL sounding material and in many ways a partner album to Earthbeat, although stylistically it's probably closer to the material on the Pulse EPs in general. Several names attributed to classic tracks are present: Mental Cube, Indo Tribe, Smart Systems, as well as unheard pieces by Yage and even one by FSOL. Furthermore, there are 3 tracks by Dope Module, a previously unheard alias, the name originally appearing as the title of a 1990 Mental Cube track. The tracks cover the typical range of sounds one would expect from the original Jumpin' and Pumpin' era, with UK hardcore, rave, breakbeat and techno pieces present. It's very much a J&P focused release, with nothing in the style of the more house-leaning debut material. Similarly, there's nothing in the more forward-thinking vein of Papua New Guinea or Principles of Motion, although it's likely those sorts of tracks would probably just end up on a normal From the Archives release. There are a few surprises in there, such as the Dope Module vocals, the fact that a short run of tracks plays gaplessly, even including a snippet of Brian and Gaz talking in the studio, and Visual Attack being reassigned as a Smart Systems piece. Given how the band was screwed over by Beat Farm, it's fitting to have the track in a more suitable home here. Originally expected to be a digital-only release, it was with welcome surprise that the album came out on CD almost a year after its initial release. The placeholder cover, little more than the Principles of Motion sleeve with the title written in the same inappropriate font as the Environment's placeholder cover, is given a polish by Boogie for the CD edition, with added colour and the band name written in Eurostyle Extended, once again in mixed case. The first 2 pages of the booklet feature an early 90s shot of the band in front of the Houses of Parliament with various polygons overlaid and the EBV logo. The remaining pages feature, interestingly, excerpts from the script for the unfinished Yage film. These are overlaid with further polygons, as well as the splatter effect first seen in the From the Archives Volume 4 booklet, the exploding head logo, and a photograph of Vit. Underneath the disc is the first appearance of the graffiti logo, dripping spray paint with FSOL stenciled in the centre, while the back cover and spines feature the same layout as the previous FSOL digital CD releases. Somehow, Dope Module's She's So Automatic got lost somewhere, not being listed on the back cover at all, despite still being present on the disc itself. Many of the track titles are abbreviated on the cover too. A promo CDR was issued at the time, interestingly, featuring the Jumpin' and Pumpin' logo. The album was reissued by Waymay Records as a triple 12-inch package in 2024. The tracklist itself is shifted around a bit to fit the different sides of the vinyl, although annoyingly the linked tracks aren't always placed together for some reason. Also, strangely, She's So Automatic has been reassigned to FSOL, not sounding anything like FSOL though. The artwork on this version remains largely faithful to the original, with the same exploding head logo and splatter designs. The final edition was released in 2 separate numbered editions, one a standard black vinyl, one a limited edition orange version, available exclusively from the Waymay Records Bandcamp and Juno in the UK. Fans of this era of the band and early dance music in general will want to check this one out. In terms of those coming from the group's later sound, I'd recommend approaching Earthbeat, the Pulse EPs and Principles of Motion first, as although there are numerous excellent tracks here, particularly those credited to Yage and Mental Cube, there are also some which feel slightly more basic and repetitive than usual. Mental Cube, Sightings. Bleep techno in their Q vein. A catchy arpeggio leads the melody, with several counter-melodies appearing throughout the track. A saxophone sample adds a touch of variety, suggesting it comes from an era where the band were developing their sound somewhat, although the fairly static nature of the drums detracts from this a touch. Nevertheless, it's a fun, bouncy, catchy track that could have been huge had it been released as a follow-up to Q. The fact that it wasn't is testament to Brian and Gaz's determination to continually move forwards. Indo Tribe, Just Look and Let Me Look at You. Recorded around the same time as Bite the Bullet Baby, with similar breakbeats as well as the same radio chatter sample and Twin Peaks Bite the Bullet Baby speech. It's not surprising that this track was left unreleased in favour of that, as this is a fairly simplistic piece. A buzzing acidic synth melody leads the way for the most part, although the second half features a couple of brief atmospheric breakdowns with more atmospheric synth pads and a woman reciting the track's title. Nevertheless, despite the typical samples thrown over the track, it's still a touch more repetitive than your average Dougans Cobain production. On the physical editions, it's simply titled Just Look. Dope Module, We Bring It To You. The first track released under the Dope Module name On first seeing the track list for By Any Other Name, the appearance of a new alias did seem strange, but hearing the track it makes sense. The presence of Gaz's vocals here makes the track sound different to any other Jumpin' and Pumpin' era pieces. We bring the future of dance, we bring it to you in a trance, we'll make your body move, we'll make your body groove. It's not the most in-depth lyric ever. Away from the vocals, it's another one of the more simplistic pieces from the era, built around a single repetitive synth line and chunky techno drum machine beat for the first half with comparatively little variation. Alternate melodies and additional samples are introduced in the second half, adding some much needed change. Nevertheless, much like Just Look, it's not hard to hear why other tracks were chosen over this back in the day. On the physical releases, it's simply titled We Bring It. Yage 831am. Sharing a name with the remix name given to the first appearance of Pulse State isn't just a coincidence, but this Yage track is stylistically quite similar to that FSOL track. A melancholic, bleepy synth melody, string-like pads, layers of mid-tempo beats and plenty of odd little samples thrown in, many sounding like birdsong. At 2 minutes, a saxophone melody is brought in, changing the vibe considerably. After a brief breakdown, an entirely new melody appears, accompanied by wordless vocals and a man whispering 831. There's a striking difference between this complex piece and the simplicity of the previous two, and it makes sense given the artist name. Yage, being the engineer throughout much of the band's career, has elevated the name to a more important status than most aliases, even with musical crossovers. Calcium and Lifeforms both being FSOL tracks that began life as Yage ones, and so a track like this is deserving of the name. This could have fit comfortably on Accelerator. The future sound of London, Across the Rivers. The sole FSOL track on the original release of By Any Other Name, Across the Rivers definitely feels like a more of a prototype of the band's later sound than anything else on the album. Layers of programmed breakbeat style rhythms and a deep bass loop lead the track, over which the typical samples are layered, and most intriguingly, muted trumpet improvisation, which would later be more famously chopped up and used as the lead instrument on the far outside of Lung. It's always fascinating to hear how far back certain musical elements go, and this is a great example. Ultimately, it's a fairly static sounding track, the trumpet improv not quite varied enough to distract from the repetition, but as part of the broader FSOL story, it's a wonderful insight into the pair's working process. Dope module in a cage in a can. More dope module and another track that justifies the name. It could conceivably have been put out as part of the varied Indo Tribe project, but the pitched down spoken words by Gaz combined with the American woman talking at length about an art exhibition make this feel incredibly different to Dougans Cobain from any era or under any name. A squelchy acid synth and trumpet sample are the only melodic elements, the track largely built around chunky layers of percussion and spoken samples. If I had to be absolutely honest, I'd say this track annoys the shit out of me, but that's just me. On the physical versions, it's known simply as In a Cage. Indo Tribe, Great Danger. Great Danger begins by suggesting Indo Tribe going in yet another direction, airy techno. And then in comes the pummeling synth line and it's straight back into 1991 rave territory. Techno drums, vocal samples, yeah, synth stabs, the odd breakbeat, it's all very much rooted in its era. Some of the breakdown sections are quite atmospheric, including one with a haunted whispered voice stating, "I must warn you, you're in great danger," hence the title, and they stop the track from being too repetitive. Mental Cube, Keep Walking. As with Sightings, Keep Walking could have been part of a follow-up release to Q, complete with catchy bleep melodies and a bouncy drum machine rhythm. It's interesting to think that Q was the only Mental Cube track released in this style, while both By Any Other Name tracks under that name are very similar. A nicely developed piece, it goes through a melancholic secondary melody that contrasts with the main tune, as well as a chaotic 60s sci-fi robot gone wrong section that throws things into much dafter territory. Overall, an excellent track. Yage, Travellers. Minimal techno from the typically excellent Yage alias. Rhythmically built around a single kick drum accompanied by various clicking sounds, the track features an array of atmospheric samples and a plucked melody over its first 2 minutes before a breakbeat begins to fade in for the second half, picking up energy just as it goes along. Features more individual samples than maybe any other Jumpin' and Pumpin' era piece, making it texturally fascinating and heavily atmospheric. With only a tweak or two, Travellers could very easily fit on Tales of Ephedrina. The track ends with one of By Any Other Name's linking sections. It would be too generous to call them environments, which is a wonderful little moment for nerdy fans, a recording of Brian and Gaz chatting while working on a track.
Pause it again, you just did it. Well, hang on, pause it again, let's see you pause it.
A lovely little unique moment. Yage, Garden Bridge. The most chilled piece on By Any Other Name, and another excellent Yage track. Eastern sounding plucked melodies, synth pads and a simple kick drum at first with a gentle breakbeat coming in later and a bongo loop near the end. Another track that could easily fit on Accelerator alongside the likes of While Others Cry. An American woman complains at the end, leading into the next track. Smart Systems, You Might.
You are a stubborn bastard.
Thank you, anonymous woman at the start. This is a fascinating one as it's effectively a very early version of Arizona, the environment linking liquid insects with swab on Tales of Everdrina. The You Might vocal sample, guitar notes, echoing percussion and clattering sounds are all played much faster here, but are all the same as on that 1993 track. Otherwise, it's a surprisingly upbeat, bouncy breaks techno track that bears little in common with the Hoover-led hardcore one would normally expect from Smart Systems. Despite a fairly static drum track, it sounds like it was recorded fairly late in the jumping and pumping era with a huge number of samples and complex structure. Almost certainly a 1992 track, possibly even recorded around the time the band signed to Virgin. Dope module, Kremlin taped. Clattering mid-tempo breaks, layers of percussion, big doomy notes, echoing vocal samples. This is prototype ISDN at play here. It's a shame it's so short, acting like a brief prelude to the following track more than anything else. Dope module, She's So Automatic, also known as the future sound of London She's So Automatic. Following straight on from the atmospheric outro to Kremlin taped, She's So Automatic is more proto-ISDM from Dope module. If this had appeared on a From the Archives album, it would probably have been considered a 1994 track. Wah-wah guitar funk, trip-hop breaks, distorted synth melodies gives an idea of how varied the group's output was at an early date. The only obvious link to the band's early years is the ringing guitar sample, which also appears in, fittingly, Dope module and Headkick. The track has the dubious honour of being missed off the tracklist of the CD sleeve. This might explain why it was reassigned to FSOL on the 3LP edition with no reference on the CD art, which was reused for the vinyl edition. Yage, Under the Rock. Process breaks, atmospheric synth bleeps, layers of weird samples, strings, whooshes, field recordings, more orchestral sounds, and a generally tense atmosphere make this a Yage track. Clearly on the more experimental end of the band's early work, as with most Yage pieces, it's sadly a touch less developed than the usual Yage material, though still an intriguing piece. Yage, First Calling, a cleverly titled track featuring possibly the earliest appearance of the Yage flute, most well known for its use on Yage itself, but also the band's unreleased remix of Holy Ghost Inc.'s Mad Monks on Zinc, as well as Journey to the Centre. Other than the inclusion of the flute, it's a comparatively unremarkable track, a bouncy, bleepy house piece with some brass stabs, closer to the Mental Cube tracks on By Any Other Name than any of the Yage ones. Smart Systems Corridor LM3. A very atypical Smart Systems track, Corridor LM3 is surprisingly minimal given the artist name. Bright, airy synth pads, dubby bass, a squelchy 303 line, and a fast-paced kick tambourine loop are the main elements of the piece, which gives it a fairly atmospheric sound a long way from the bulk of the material from this era. A wise choice to close the album on a very forward-looking piece. And that's your lot for this week. Let me know your feelings on this. I really would love to hear what you thought of Environments when you first heard it. Were you one of those really hoping for something more, a big classic album, or did you enjoy the slightly odd side project version of the band's 90s sound, effectively a studio album version of the ISDN transmissions? Also, what do you reckon to By Any Other Name? Give me your thoughts below in the comments section. I love reading and replying. Also, like, subscribe, share, all this kind of stuff really helps my channel. And I'll be back next week with some Stacker Humanoid remixes. Please join me then.